Good morning, Story Savants. How are you doing today? I'm going to have to apologize for the sound quality today. I can hear my brothers downstairs watching a movie, so there might just be a little bit of a hum in the background. And we also have jets flying over today, so there may be a time I'll have to stop, and I'll probably edit that out. But if there's a little bit of background noise, I apologize. Please bear with me. I'm a little bit late in my podcast this week. I just had one of those busy weeks. We had Memorial Day at the beginning of the week for those who are in the States, which was great. It was a holiday, but I also kind of lost that as a work day, and I've had a hard time getting back on track. I was also not feeling well for a couple of days, and so obviously that had to do with it. So it's just one of those weeks where it's Thursday as I'm recording this, where I usually record it on Monday, and I'm wondering where in the heck my week went. I haven't gotten anything done, which is not true. I've gotten a few things done, but not nearly as much as I had planned on getting done. So that's why I'm a little bit late, but here we are. And I don't have too much of an update. We're doing well. Things are really opening up here in Utah in terms of the quarantine. So I'm glad to see that. And yeah, I'm just plugging along, getting my writing done. And mostly I'm still working on my course. That's the biggest thing. In fact, that's what you're looking at is one of the course pages right now, which I probably shouldn't have on my YouTube channel for those who are watching on my YouTube channel. But hey, at least you get to kind of get a preview of what the course will look like. Yeah, anyway, so today, oh, here comes a jet. All right, I listened to that for a few seconds and then edited everything out. We're going to talk about the 3 or 4 act structure. This is a little bit more general than the 9 plot points that I've taught you before. So it's a little bit of a different thing, where the plot points are kind of beats that you hit throughout your story to keep it moving forward. This is more like dividing your story into sectors, and those beats will fall within a particular sector. But it's also very, it's good, it's educational to know what the sectors are and what should be happening within each sector of your story. That will also help you to plan your story and move forward with it. And if you're missing something, it can really help fill in gaps for you. So the difference between the 3 and the 4 act structure. Usually people talk about the 3 act structure, right? And the first act is the first 25% of the story. The second act is 25 to 75%. So it's kind of the middle 2 sections. And then, of course, the fourth act, or the third act, excuse me, is the last 25% of the story. So I actually have a diagram of this if you're watching on YouTube, but I'm also going to give you a free resource. It'll be a PDF that has this diagram on it so you can see the difference, and it will also kind of list what needs to be in each of the acts. So the only difference between the 3 and the 4 act structure really is that in the 3 act structure, they're combining the 2 middle acts. So if the 4 act structure, if you just think about dividing your story into 4 equal parts of 25% each, you've got first 25%, second 25%, third 25%, fourth 25%. The 3 act structure, it basically does the same thing, except act 2 comprises the 2 middle portions. Okay, so act 2 is twice as long as act 1 or act 3, but they basically have all the same stuff in them. So I'm actually going to talk about the 4 act structure, because a lot of people, when they talk about the 3 act structure, they end up dividing the second act into 2 parts anyway. So it's just, to me, more logical in my brain to talk about the 4 act structure. So that's how I'm going to frame this. All right, so here's what you need to know when you're setting up your story. In the first act, so this is the first 20 to 25% of your story, you're basically just introducing us to the hero and showing us what is going on in his or her life before the conflict arises, okay? So this is just the status quo. It's his life before the conflict, before the world of the story. How is he living at the beginning, okay? It also corresponds with, in the 9 plot points, it's gonna correspond with the world before. And a little bit with the intro to conflict, which is just him receiving information that's a little bit new to him, right? But you're basically setting up, what does the hero have to lose? So we're going to see his life, you know, his relationships, his home, you know, his reputation, his friends. These are things that he has to lose and that the conflict might threaten. All right, then we should talk about the villain or the antagonist. Should we see them in the first act? The answer is really no when we're talking about the actual villain. You don't want the villain and the hero to come face to face in the first act as a general rule. I'm sure there are cases when that does happen, especially for long form series, but overall, you don't really want that confrontation to happen until closer to the end of the story. However, you can have an early inciting incident or partial villain. Now, what this means is that even though they're not going to come face to face with the actual villain, maybe they come face to face with a minion of the villain, sort of a lesser bad guy, or maybe just with the consequences of something the bad guy does. So maybe they come upon, a farm that's burned, or maybe someone who has died, and they did not see the villain that did that, but they're kind of seeing it secondhand based on, kind of seeing the results of the villain's actions, that sort of thing. Either way, this is not going to be something that incites them to action. It's not going to change their world in the fact that they're just going to go back to their day-to-day lives afterward, even if it's kind of a little bit of an exciting thing that happens that doesn't happen every day. This is not going to make them go on a journey. They're still going to return to their previous lives from anything that happened in the first act. The end of the first act happens when they do receive their call to adventure. So when something happens that actually makes them leave their old life and really embark upon a journey or an adventure, they're leaving the world they've known. There's something scary and challenging that they need to face or accomplish or achieve. So let's use an example. If we use, one of my favorite examples, let's use Luke Skywalker, right? So in the first act, we set up who he is before the conflict. We know he's a farmer, he lives on this planet, he's with his aunt and uncle, all good stuff, right? An early inciting incident might be him meeting the droids or meeting Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, those are things that are different. They change his world a little bit, but they're not going to actually make him leave his home planet. In fact, we have Obi-Wan asking Luke to come with him, and Luke says no, right? He's planning just to go back to his day-to-day life. When something happens that actually causes him to leave, that is the end of Act 1, and that's how you know you're headed into Act 2, okay? And that would be the death of his aunt and uncle, which causes him to leave with Obi-Wan Kenobi. He leaves his home planet behind. He leaves the world he's known behind. This is the launch of his adventure. And that's how you know you're at the end of Act 1 and turning over into Act 2. And once again, I'm going to have all this on a PDF for you, so you can click on that and get it after you're done listening or watching. So the second act is all about the response, okay? Usually, this shows the hero or heroine being acted upon, okay? They do a lot of running, a lot of hiding, a lot of observing and analyzing, recalculating, planning, okay? But things are acting upon them, and a lot of times they're acting out of desperation, okay? They're really flailing and floundering and not sure what to do. This is where you can also show a lot of try and fail cycles, just meaning that they try to do something and it doesn't work, right? You shouldn't have them achieve victory right away. So maybe they even take on a couple of bad guys, maybe not the main antagonist, but a few villains here and there, minor minions or whatever, and they fail, they're defeated. Maybe they get captured, maybe they get their butt kicked by, one of the bad guy swordsmen, depending on what kind of story you're talking about. If you're writing a romance, maybe they attempt to date different people. Maybe they attempt to approach, who their long-term love interest is going to be, and they get shot down, they get rejected, they have bad dating experiences. Maybe they try to find something out, thinking I'm kind of thinking of Pride and Prejudice here. She tries to find out more about Darcy, and what she hears just poisons her against him even more. It's these really terrible things. So just negative stuff, and them kind of reacting to things that they're hearing, but not really moving forward with much purpose. When we finally see them create a plan and move forward purposely, in other words, they're going from reaction to action, that is the midpoint. That's also what I call it in the 9 plot points. But this is how you know that you're moving from Act 2 to Act 3 of the 4 acts. Generally, they get new information or awareness of some kinds that pushes them to act. So if something happens and they say, okay, here's the plan, this is what we're going to do, that's your midpoint, and you're moving into the 3rd act. The 3rd act is kind of in contrast to the 2nd act. In this case, the hero is much more proactive, courageous, even ingenious in the pursuit of their goal. Of course, this should happen by degrees, not all at once, but this is where we're going to stop seeing them reacting or being acted upon, and now they're going to start to kind of charge forward and attack their obstacles, overcome their demons, and just really start learning and growing and progressing and doing things differently than they did before. The end of Act 3 is actually the climax or their transformation. Okay, I've talked about writing from your character's transformation before. So basically, they're going to, at the end of this act, all of their progress, all of the forward motion they've had, it still isn't quite enough for them to achieve victory. So you know that Act 3 is ending when they receive the final thing, the final information, or maybe it's a physical object that they need to triumph over the villain in the climax of the story. Okay, so again, I've talked about this before. The climax, or I mean, excuse me, the transformation can come prior to the climax, or it can also kind of come right in the center of the climax. Either one works. It just depends on your story and what's happening in your story. But the transformation, when they finally actually receive what they need to triumph, that's the end of Act 3, and you're moving into Act 4. Act 4 is the resolution, and it's the resolution in two ways. The first is that they actually solve their problem. So once again, if we return to Luke, his transformation kind of comes in the middle of the climax in that case, because you could say that the climax begins, you know, during the actual star battle when they're all flying around trying to destroy the Death Star, but his transformation comes right smack in the middle of that, right? When all of the other fighters have been killed off. He's the only one left, and he has to trust himself and trust the voice of Obi-Wan and, you know, trust the Force kind of a thing. So that's where his comes. So the resolution comes when he actually acts on that and destroys the Death Star. Okay, so they happen almost simultaneously, one on top of the other. But the transformation is him turning off his targeting computer and trusting the Force. The resolution is when he actually blows up the Death Star, because that solves the problem that they were trying to solve, right? That's why it's the resolution. The resolution can also include falling action after the climax. So him returning to base, you know, hugging everybody, getting the award, all of that. That's your resolution. So I also have a slide here. You'll be able to see it if you're watching this on YouTube, but if not, I will also include it in the PDF that you can go get. And it basically just gives you a visual representation of these 4 acts and, you know, what happens to signify the end and the turning over into the next act. So we have Act 1, the setup, and I have, you know, the line between Act 1 and Act 2 that says call to adventure. And then Act 2, the response, again, them being acted upon and responding to things, but not moving forward very purposely. And then the beat is called the midpoint that turns from Act 2 to Act 3. Act 3 is the charge, where they're actually moving forward with purpose. And the beat that turns Act 3 over to Act 4 is the character transformation. And then Act 4, the resolution. So you can kind of see them, if you're a more visual person, see them all laid out visually. All right. So that is pretty much what I have for you today. I wanted to go over that. If you are stuck in your story, if you are not sure what should be happening next, if you know, have a part of the story that you feel like it sags, or you kind of have lost direction, this is a good thing to go over. It's very basic. Most of us have heard of the 3-act structure and even learned about it in school, but sometimes, you know, we really tend to overthink things as writers. We try to make them too complicated. So if you just go back to the basics and run through the 4-act structure and figure out what needs to happen in each act, then chances are that's going to help give you some direction for how to move forward with your story. On the flip side, if perhaps you do have everything all planned out and you think it's all good, it's sometimes good to go back through these and make sure you've hit all the criteria for each section, each act, because sometimes you might be missing something and you just don't know it. So you might go, oh yeah, I need that, I'm missing that. And if you're missing any of the components, that's going to make your story feel kind of saggy or lopsided, and you might even end up losing some readers because it just feels a little bit out of sync. Okay, so go ahead and click on the show notes and you can go and get the PDF so that you have this and can reference it in your writing. All right, so kind of short today and sweet. I just wanted to go over that quickly. Like I said, I've had kind of a crazy week. I'm going to try to get back on track for next week, but I've got some catching up to do. So I hope everyone is doing well out there. I hope you are all well and safe, and I hope that you are having so much fun writing your stories. So get out there and get those words written. All right, see you next week.